You got it.
Great. Thank you everyone for being here. So you're probably still enjoying your tomatoes and peppers and eggplant and things, but we're going to go ahead and get talking about fall and winter gardening, because really you probably should have gotten it going about a month ago, honestly. But there are still some things that you can plant and sow at this time of year, but there's a lot you can grow in the fall and winter months. It's your typical cool season vegetables. So things that you often grow in the springtime also do well in the cool months of fall. Obviously, the fall is the time to plant a lot of your alliums, so your garlic and onions and leeks. I put asterisks next to the garlic and onions because those crops in particular, you're going to plant them in about October, and you aren't going to harvest them again until the following summer. So they're going to be in the ground a long time, taking up space in your garden. And that's just something you want to consider when, planning out your garden area, is that you aren't going to be able to get into those beds and plant anything until probably the following summer. So just keep that in mind. If you have limited space in your garden, you may not want to take it up with garlic and onions. You may choose to do other things with it. Beets and pretty much most root crops do really well in fall and winter. All of your brassicas, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, kale, kohlrabi, etc. Collards do really well. In fact, many collards actually taste better with a little frost on them, as do carrots. Carrots get sweeter with a little fall frost. Your chicories, so those are like your radicchios and escargots and frises. All of those do really well. Fava beans you can plant, and they also double as a cover crop. So you're kind of getting added benefit of nitrogen fixation with those, plus you get an edible crop out of them. Fennel, lettuce, parsley. Parsley can withstand a little bit of frost as well. Parsnips, radishes. If you like rutabagas, you can grow them. I'm not a big fan myself, but many people do like them. Swiss chard and also turnips as well. And this is kind of an abbreviated list. There are other things that you can grow. I'm going to give you some resources at the end that you can utilize to kind of see a full, more extensive list of what is possible in the fall and winter months. Things you want to consider are, there's going to be your short season crops. So those are things that you're probably going to harvest within about 50 days or so before the cold hits. So things like radishes and lettuces, arugula, those are things that they're very fast growers. You can sow them even right now and pretty much have them out of the ground before the really cold winter months settle in. Carrots, beets, Asian greens, those can be both short season or kind of the next category I have there, the cold hardy crops as well, because some of those can actually withstand a little bit of frost. So the cold hardy crops are ones that need to reach maturity before the cold hits, but you can then continue to harvest them. So the frost is not necessarily going to kill them off, but they aren't going to continue growing either. They'll go dormant at that point. But if you have something like a winter lettuce, you can actually be harvesting the outer leaves and kind of utilizing it over an extended period of time. You can also think about doing things like succession planting with these types of crops. But your cold hardy ones are pretty much most your root vegetables. So again, your beets, carrots, turnips, parsnips. Again, parsnips are another one of those crops where a little bit of frost just makes them sweeter. Those types of root vegetables do really well and can withstand a little bit of frost as well. And then you have your slow maturing crops, and these are the ones that are going to take about 100 days before you harvest them. So by the time frost hits, they won't be fully mature, and so they'll kind of then go dormant at that period of time. But then when the spring months swirl around and the days start to get longer and the temperatures start to rise, they then take off again and reach full maturity, and then you can harvest them in the spring, right before you would typically plant your spring garden. So most of your brassicas fall into this category. Cauliflower, Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts are another crop that wait till the frost hits to harvest them, and you'll get a little better flavor out of them. Cabbage and broccoli fall into this category. I would even put leeks in this category. There are some leeks that can do very well over winter months as well. In terms of when to plant, what I recommend, and we have a lot of people here, I'm not sure where everyone's from. What I'm showing are planting guides that were developed for kind of the Willamette Valley here in Oregon. They aren't going to be too different if you're at a similar latitude as we are. But you might want to look for a planting guide that's maybe a little more, applicable to the region that you're living in if you aren't located here in the Willamette Valley. But as you'll see from these guides, most summer crops really need to get started in, July, August, maybe into September. So we are kind of at the end of what would typically be the planting season for fall and winter crops, but you can still get some things in the ground right now. Think about those short season crops that I mentioned. You can still go out and sow some carrots and get a great harvest out of those, in November or something like that. Or consider getting transplants and transplanting them, so that way you have a little bit of a jump start on them. And I know log house plants, I was speaking to her, Alice, the other day, and she said she's growing 300 different varieties of winter vegetables. So she has a lot of great selection, as does Territorial, down to earth. Eugene Backyard Garden, I know there's the Bookline down in Cottage Grove as well. So, check out your local garden retailers. They may have some transplants that you can get in the ground in September and still get a good crop out of them. But if you are starting late, and I typically start my fall and winter garden late because I'm usually busy in the summer and I'm thinking about all the lovely tomatoes and peppers, and I'm not, my mind's not really thinking about a fall and winter garden. So I am one of those people that likes to, garden by the seat of my pants, so to speak. And I have planted my fall and winter garden fairly late before, even into late September. And sometimes you get lucky. It's a year where maybe you don't get a heavy frost until November, and other times it maybe doesn't work out so well for you. But if you at least select those short season crops, the ones that you can harvest within like 50, 60 days, or start with transplants, starting at this time of year where it's basically going to be September next week, you should still be able to get a fairly good fall or winter garden out of it. 3 things to think about when planting a fall and winter garden are obviously crop and varietal selection. So you don't want to try to grow peppers in the fall or winter. So think about, again, those cool season crops. And then varietal selection is also important as well. Location, and then I'm going to talk about season extension techniques. So obviously with varietal selection, you do want to look for varieties that are going to perform well in the fall and winter. And this is always noted in, seed catalogs. It may say cold hardy, it may say frost tolerant, it could say, winter ready. They use all sorts of different terms to kind of let you know that, hey, these can handle either a little frost or even in some cases freezing temperatures as well. And it is important to pay attention to that. You have things like broccoli, and if you look at the varieties in the catalog, there are going to be some that are noted for fall and some that are noted for spring. And there is a difference. When you plant something for a fall harvest, when you plant them, you're planting them basically in the summer when it's still hot. And so they're planted during warm temperatures, long days, but then they're going to, they're basically bred, to continue to develop as the days get shorter and the temperatures start to drop, so that you can actually harvest them in the fall or winter months. Whereas broccoli that was maybe bred for growing in the springtime, they're obviously going to be better suited for seeding and sowing when it's still really cold outside. And then as they grow and develop and mature, they're doing that while the days are getting longer and as temperatures are developing as well. So there is going to be a difference between varieties that were developed to perform well in the fall versus those that were performed well, say, in the spring months. So pay attention to that and look for those types of varieties that are well suited for either a little frost, a little freezing, or for growing in the fall and winter months when selecting what you want to grow. These are a few suggestions of things that I've grown before. I'm obviously not going to go through every vegetable, but these are the types of things I like to eat and grow during fall and winter months. There's probably a few things missing from here as well, but in terms of beets, I like the red ace, and I've had good luck with the winter keeping, growing that fairly late into the season. Asian greens are great this time of year, bok choys or even tat soys. I like the mei ching chong or mei ching choy. That's a very good variety to grow, and they can often, they're going to be one of those ones where they'll grow and, they need to reach full maturity, but they can withstand a little bit of frost, especially if you're using maybe some type of row cover or something like that to protect them. So you can continue growing those fairly late into the season. Lots of different types of carrots do really well. I like the Scarlet Nance and the Bolero and, the Royal Chantenays as well. And again, with carrots, they're going to get a little bit sweeter after that first frost as well. In terms of kale, the Russian varieties do better than the Italian varieties in fall and winter months. So the Italian varieties are like, people refer to them as the Dino kales or the Ticino or Tuscan kales as well. Those aren't as well suited. I'm not saying you can't grow them in fall and winter, especially if you have a row cover or something like that. But the red Russian varieties are just better developed and bred really to withstand frost and colder temperatures. And if you're looking for, say, more of a green curly kale, winter boar is a very good option as well. I love kohlrabi. It's one of my favorite things. It's just really versatile. You can eat it, raw or cooked. I like to make slaws with it, like a cold slaw or something like that, or throw it into stir fries, soups. And I like the super schmelz quite a bit. And I also threw in a couple chicories down there, radicchio. So there's the Rosalba. And that one is actually bred, so it actually turns more pink with a little bit of frost. So, the cooler it gets, the pinker it's going to get. And with that Castel Franco that you see there at the bottom, it's kind of got that speckled leaf. And that's another one where as it starts to get cooler, it's just going to get, a little cool temperature is really going to bring out the speckles in those leaves. So those are a couple suggestions for some varieties that I've had luck with and enjoyed when fall and winter gardening. I'm going to show you a fall and winter planting guide and OSU publication at the end, and you'll find some more suggestions in there as well. And of course, dig through seed catalogs, look for those varieties that are suited for this time of year, and go out and experiment and take notes. This is where it's good to keep a garden journal, so that if you grow something, it did well during a fall and winter month, and you liked that variety, write it down so that you remember next year when you're ordering your seeds and getting ready to sow again. Location is obviously important. You want to choose the sunniest location in your garden. The sun is going to be lower in the horizon this time of year. And keep in mind that the area that's the sunniest spot during the summer months might not be the sunniest spot during the winter months for you. So keep an eye on your garden and see where the sun really hits during the winter months and select that really sunny location. I like to keep winter gardens easily accessible. If you think about those permaculture principles in terms of what you plant closest to the house versus what you plant further away. You don't want to be slogging through your garden when it's cold and rainy and muddy and soggy outside. So keeping your winter garden closer to the house, you're probably going to pay a little bit more attention to it. And it'll be easier to go outside and harvest at night when it's dark and you want to go, maybe cut a few leaves of kale to include in your dinner or something like that. So that's also another recommendation. And then wind protection can also be really important. I should throw frost protection up here, but I'll talk about season extension in a minute. But wind protection is also important as well. You can use row covers or windbreaks. Keep in mind that if you're kind of at the bottom of a hill, that cold air is really dense and it will sink. So you may want to consider either planting up on a slope, or if you can use some type of hedgerow or something to divert that cold air. That's also really helpful. If you're planting on a slope, obviously the south facing slope, if you have that option, oftentimes we don't, but if you do have a choice, choose the south facing slope. And then of course, one thing you want to consider are season extension techniques. So season extension techniques are just methods that you can use that are going to make the conditions more suitable for growing during those cold fall and winter months. So I highly recommend raised beds. They don't have to be framed. All the photos I have here are of framed raised beds. Many of these are from our demo garden here at the OSU Extension house in Eugene, the Kaufman house. So you're welcome to come down and take a look at those if you're curious and want to know what they look like. We have a lot of different designs on display. But raised beds, they're obviously going to drain better. So you don't have to worry about, if you're just planting directly into the soil and not even into a mound or anything, there's a good chance that you're going to be, during those cold winter or those rainy winter months, you're going to end up with a really saturated soil. So it's just, almost puddling in the soil. And once that soil is saturated, if all that pore space in the soil is filled with water, you're going to lose oxygen in the soil. And that's when you start to get all those root rot problems and other issues. So grow into raised beds, whether they're framed or if you're just developing some kind of mound or hill, to plant into, that's highly recommended. And then they're going to warm up quicker in the spring as well. So raised beds are highly recommended for these months, and also using some type of mulch. I tend to use straw mulch. So you can see in the photos, there's some mulch placed around the strawberries as well as the onions there. And so that is going to help insulate the soil as well. You can also use things like shredded leaves. I do recommend running them through a lawnmower first if possible. Cardboard and even newspaper, make sure only to use, black print newspaper if doing that. You can use wood chips as well, but you are probably going to want to remove those from the bed before you're going to want to till those into the soil the following spring, because they'll take quite a while to break down. I like straw, it's fairly easy to use. And when spring rolls around, you can just kind of move the straw back a little bit. And so as the plants start to grow, give them a little bit more space. It's still there to suppress weeds. And I've even then left the straw, removed whatever I was harvesting, and then transplanted right back into it before. And you can do that as well. The other nice thing about straw is if you are doing, tilling in anything, is you can till it right into the soil, and it'll break down and turn into organic matter and just make your soil much healthier. The one drawback of things like straw, though, is they make really good hiding habitat for slugs and things like that. So I do recommend you want to get out and probably, right now and start doing some trapping for slugs. This is right before the breeding season. So any amount of slugs that you can remove right now, that's going to help you get a head start on them going into next year. And then the final thing I'll talk about is just using season extension techniques. And there's a lot of different methods of doing this. The easiest thing to do is to get some type of row cover. Sometimes these row covers are called remay or frost cloth, or they have different names to them, but they're basically row covers. They're kind of a heavy cloth material that helps heat up everything that's growing beneath it, so it traps heat in there. So it kind of warms up the area underneath and creates almost like a greenhouse condition, so that things can continue to grow and develop, and just protects the plants from frost as well. These type of fabrics come in different weights. There's typically a lightweight one, medium, and heavyweight. You definitely want a medium or heavyweight for fall and winter growing. If you're going to try to grow through the winter months, I definitely recommend one of the heavyweight type of cloths. And then if you're just maybe growing into November or December, when we start to get frost, usually a medium weight one is suffice. The lightweight ones are great for spring, and that's when I tend to use a lightweight row cover. They'll heat it up just enough as temperatures start to rise in the spring. But what they're also really great for is exclusion, so excluding pests. So most of flea beetles can become a really big problem in the springtime and early summer months, and there's really not any organic control or great control options for flea beetles. Really, the best thing you can do is actually put a lightweight row cover over your crop, and that basically prevents the flea beetles from getting in. So those lightweight ones are much better suited for the spring months. Other things you can do is build little miniature hoop houses. So the one in the top right-hand corner, I'm going to show you a publication in a minute that gives you directions on how to build that. So it's basically a raised bed with kind of a little hoop house over it. And I think in the publication they call it a cloche. I wouldn't really consider that a cloche, but that's what it's called. And that's basically just putting fabric over, clear plastic over hoops. And that clear plastic is then again going to create kind of a greenhouse-like effect where it heats up everything inside. And so you're going to have much warmer temperatures and be able to grow things further into winter months, and also maybe get an earlier start on certain things in the spring as well. You can also use individual cloches. You can kind of see that water bottle sitting there. So cloches traditionally are bell-shaped, but you can use like an old recycled gallon milk jug, or this is obviously a big water bottle. And you do want something that, I like this, it has the cap off of it. So that way you can get good ventilation, because it can get really humid under there. So you do want something that you can open up to ventilate, but also it's nice if you have that cap to then put that back on and kind of trap those temperatures in there, especially at nighttime, or if you have a really cold week. You can kind of close them off a little bit. You can also use things like cold frames. So on the right-hand corner, I have two pictures of cold frames. One of them is built out of wood. It's really nice. And that's basically just, you know, a box with a couple pieces of glass over it. And that glass then again heats up. This is a lot of people use these for getting seedlings started in the spring. The one just above it, it's basically, you know, they took some hay bales and took this old window frame that they probably got at like a Habitat for Humanity store, was lying around the house, and essentially just set it over the plants. And it heats it up and keeps things warmer so that the crops can continue to develop and mature, protects them from frost, etc. So those are great ways to heat things up. With cold frames, you do want them to be south facing, so they're getting the most sun as possible. You know, you can also, I'm talking about using fabric cloths, so you can put those over hoops. You can also just kind of gently put them over the vegetables themselves. I'm actually doing some research on low tunnels for strawberry production. So we're trying to see how late into the season we can grow strawberries and produce fruit. So far, we've been harvesting up to, you know, Thanksgiving using low tunnels. So a low tunnel is very similar to that photo you see where you have the fabric row cover over some hoops, but instead of using fabric, you essentially just use a greenhouse type of plastic, and it basically acts as a miniature greenhouse. And so that's another option for season extension as well, as using some type of low tunnel. So there's a lot of different options. You know, a lot of these things, you know, besides maybe the row covers, but, you know, certainly the cloches and, you know, the cold frames and things, you can often find materials lying around your house that maybe you can use, or recycled goods that you can use as well. It doesn't have to be anything fancy that you spend a lot of money on. There are ways of doing these relatively cheaply as well. So before I go, I do want to recommend a couple of publications. These are in our OSU Extension catalog, and we'll go ahead and put the link to that in the chat box, but lots of free publications on gardening in our OSU Extension catalog, so I highly recommend you check it out. If you go to the catalog, there's going to be a search box once you're at the catalog, and you'll see below all three of these publications, I have little codes written down. And so if you go to the OSU Extension Catalog website, you can simply type in PNW 548, and that will pop up the fall and winter vegetable gardening in the Pacific Northwest. So that's a publication. In fact, Pat Patterson, one of our master gardeners here in Lane County, actually was an author on this publication. So it's very well suited for the Willamette Valley. It's going to tell you what types of crops you can grow in the fall and winter, when to plant, what should be direct seeded versus transplanted, and gives you other tips on season extension and soil preparation and things like that. So I highly recommend that publication. And again, these are all free to download or view online. There's also one on building raised beds if you're interested in constructing raised beds. And then there's that one on the right on how to build your own raised bed cloche. Again, I personally wouldn't call that a cloche, but that's what they're calling it in the publication. So we'll go with it, and you can just go to our catalog and do a search for those codes there, and all three of those will show up. And with that, I'll go ahead and open it up to questions. Before I do, I just want to make one comment. As a extension faculty, I do have to do a certain number of evaluations per year on talks that I give. So I'm going to go ahead and take this link down below. I'm going to throw it into the chat box. And if all of you would be so kind to click on that at some point this evening, maybe before you turn off your computer, and just fill out that evaluation, I would really appreciate it. And with that, I'll go ahead and open it up to the Q&A.
Thank you, Erica, for that great talk. We do have a couple questions already, and if there are others, please put them in the Q&A box. We have one question about brassicas, if it's better to put them in by transplant or seed.
Transplant. Absolutely, with brassicas, you almost always want to transplant those. They're just better suited for transplanting. Things you can direct seed would be like carrots and beets. You know, certainly I direct seeded kohlrabi before. You know, a lot of those things can be direct seeded. But for most of your brassicas like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, cabbage, you definitely want to transplant those.
Planting peas and beans, can you do that still now?
Yes, yes. Peas are a good thing. Yeah, I didn't have that on my list. That's definitely in the publication where you'll get a more extensive list, but absolutely, peas are a good one for fall gardening.
Yeah, I just planted mine not too long ago, so they're coming up.
Yes.
Question, what do you recommend for container gardening? What plants do best in containers in the winter?
You know, most of the things I mentioned, it's really going to depend on the size of your container. So, you know, if you have a nice, say, you know, a 5-gallon bucket, even I grow kale in 5-gallon buckets. So that's certainly something you can do in containers. Root vegetables are a bit harder. I've, you know, again, maybe it's just the type of container. If you can find a really large container, you might have more success with root vegetables, but I haven't had much success doing root vegetables in containers, but anything like, you know, parsley does great. I'm trying to think back to that list of vegetables that I had. Let me actually just click on my little presentation and jog my mind. So I've done garlic in containers before. Certainly, you know, things like kale, kohlrabi. I've done, you know, broccoli and especially broccoli raw, which is more of a sprouting type broccoli that can do really well. Again, you're going to want at least like a 5-gallon bucket for those types of things. They have deeper root systems. Lettuces you can do. Certainly things like fennel I've tried before, radishes. So that is a root vegetable, but I've had luck doing radishes. They don't have that deep of a root. Swiss chard is really good. So there's definitely a lot that you can do. Even the peas and the fava beans, those can all be done in container pots as well. The larger the container, the better, because it gives, you know, more root space. The key to container gardening is you don't want to put like a heavy compost in there. You want really kind of a light potting mix, because as you water it, it's going to sink a little bit and kind of compact. So choose a light potting soil mix that's well drained, and of course make sure you have holes on the bottom of your pot for drainage as well.
Great answer. How do you contend with cabbage butterflies at this time of year after planting broccoli?
Yeah, there's a few things. Hand picking is obviously the first one. Monitoring and hand picking. You can do there are some pesticides, obviously, for organic options. You would want to do something like a BT spray, Bacillus thuringiensis. That's good for pretty much any caterpillar type pest. You can even use a row cover. Put a row cover, and that's going to exclude the moss or the butterflies from getting in and laying eggs on your plant. So that's a great way to protect them and prevent them from ever getting in there to begin with.
Just to remind people again, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A box. Another question we have is, where do you find straw that isn't full of seeds?
So there's a difference between hay and straw. So you definitely want to go ahead and look for straw because the large majority of the seed is removed from that, whereas with hay it hasn't been. So that's where you're going to get a lot of that resprouting that occurs. There also tends to be more herbicide residue in hay and also more weed seeds in hay as well. So look for straw, not hay, and that will be a big difference maker for you.
One question I had is, I love the chicory that you had. Those were gorgeous. And I assume you do need some frost protection for those row covers.
Depending how, yes, go ahead. I'll let you.
And if you do, how does the water penetrate the row covers, or do you need to take it off during the day?
It depends on the row covers. A lot of it, especially the heavier ones, it will not penetrate. Certainly some of the lighter ones, some of it will kind of seep through. So yeah, it is a good idea if you don't have drip irrigation running underneath or something, that you will have to take those off and water underneath, whether that be allowing the rainwater in or going in and hand watering. It is good to go ahead and open those up. Really depends on the time of year. You know, there does come a certain point where the soil just kind of stays wet. And at that point, you can pretty much just leave it on. But yeah, chicory, so a lot of those can withstand a little bit of frost. You can't grow them into the deep winter months without some type of season extension, but certainly like the ones I mentioned, they actually, you know, they start turning colors and everything with a little bit of frost. So they're kind of developed to grow that time of year as well.
Another question, we use pine straw as a mulch in the South, but I don't see it used here much. Why not?
That's a good question. I'm not sure why we don't use it up here. May just be availability. Maybe we, you know, but that would be my guess.
Can carrots be grown in containers?
That's again a root crop. I haven't had a lot of luck doing it. And again, it might just be I haven't been growing them in big enough containers. So I have grown them and gotten small carrots off of them, little baby carrots and things. So I'm sure there's other people that have maybe had better luck with them. So go ahead and give it a try. Again, think about the fact that a carrot can grow, maybe up to 6 inches long. So you're definitely going to want a deeper pot with that, and maybe even a slightly wider pot as well. But yeah, go for it. Give it a try and see how that goes.
Cold frames, do you need to open them each day during the winter?
Well, maybe not every day, depends on the temperature, but certainly when it heats up, you do want to open those up to ventilate them. Thank you for saying that. I forgot to mention that point. And even if you're doing, little miniature hoop houses or low tunnels, those do need to be, it can get really humid under there. Especially if you have a warm, sunny day, you'll start to see kind of condensation developing underneath. You definitely want to open those up and ventilate them. If you get too much humidity, that's when all those, fungal pathogens and everything can really start to take hold. So ventilation is great. And even with the row covers, it's good. If you have a warm, sunny day, even if you're using the fabric ones, just open them up and let them get, some ventilation. It's always a great idea.
Lisa has trouble growing carrots. Any tips for carrots?
It depends on, soil can really make a difference. A heavy clay soil, it is going to be hard to grow carrots in. So if that's the issue, then, I would say start amending your soil with organic matter and try to, make it a little less dense and heavy. Make sure you aren't planting too deep. Carrot seed is really small, so it could be an issue of just planting too deep. Typically, if people have issues growing carrots, it's because they just don't have a great soil type for it. They usually have a really heavy soil that's more challenging to grow carrots. And if that's the case, you want to start amending that clay soil with organic matter, adding compost in to kind of lighten it up a little and change the structure of that soil, make it a little lighter.
She's actually saying they sprout, but they don't thrive.
Yeah, so I mean, they will sprout. Again, to me, it sounds like maybe a clay soil issue. It's hard to know without knowing exactly what's going on there. Yeah, they'll sprout in the clay soil, but they're kind of stunted. Oftentimes they'll fork a little bit, and they just won't grow big. You'll end up with really small kind of carrots that don't thrive, essentially. So I'm going to assume that's potentially a soil issue going on in this situation. But again, it's hard to know without knowing the specifics.
I sometimes have problems with carrots. They start growing and then it seems like something eats them. I'm not sure what, but I have that problem sometimes. And sometimes I have issues with, even though I have raised beds, they're very gnarled. They're not growing straight.
Yeah.
So and even there, the soil might be too thick.
I was going to say that's probably a soil issue. The other thing people do with carrots is plant them too densely and don't thin them. And so you'll end up with small carrots as well. I like to let mine get, till the greens are a couple inches, and then I start thinning. And I'll just thin and, put one finger between them and thin them. And then I go and put 2 fingers between them and thin them. And then, 3 fingers between, and that's you can kind of keep increasing the space. And the nice thing is that as you're thinning them, oftentimes you'll get little baby carrots that you can also consume along the way as well. So make sure you aren't planting them too densely. That can also be a big issue because they're tiny seeds. So they are hard to direct sow and not plant super dense as well.
Yeah, she's saying it might be slugs. So
yes,
that's what I think might be my issue too sometimes.
Yeah, slugs definitely like to eat on them. Hopefully you don't have something like wireworm or some type of grub that's living in the soil as well. Those can certainly feed on them as well.
We have one last question before we need to go on to the next speaker. Is pine straw the same thing as pine needles?
I don't think so, but I could be wrong. I'm not all that familiar with pine straw. If someone knows and wants to chime in the chat, go for it. It's not something that I'm familiar with here in Oregon or on the West Coast in general.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Erica. That was great. You did a great job in a short period.